Greetings one and all, here in the Holy Apple, Holy Hilltop, Tal Binyamin, in the Holy Land. We are on the 20th day of Iyar. Before we start this class, just want to say that besides, of course, this class being for the sake of heaven and to remove the divine presence from exile, it also will be to elevate the souls of the holy Jews in Meron up north that passed away a couple of days ago on the hilltop of Meron. There's a lot to say about that, but for now, just say that I think it's an important wake-up call for all of us. This is the second year in a row that, as if Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is trying to give us a message. Last year, because of the virus, so nobody was allowed up there, only a selected few. And this year also it was canceled in the beginning of the event at 1 a.m. So, wake-up call for all of us. And especially during the days where we're talking about the students of Rabbi Akiva dying, and once again we have students dying and passing away, we better get our act together. Okay, let's move on. This series, it's either a 3 or 4 part series with God's help. Whoever's here, whoever's watching it must have merit, or they have from their descendants they have merit, because this is a very, very important class. Whoever you could pass this on to share, tweet, whatever the words are, do it. It's very, very important. It's fundamental. It's ABC of our times. The subject today, the state of Israel, the hand of God or Satan, question mark. Finally, a guide for the perplexed. Okay. So, our number one, beginning our journey, put your seatbelts on, our number one foundation in our journey is the concept of time. When God created the world in 6 days, He created also within time, He created the months, the years, and each month of the year on the Jewish calendar has various characteristic traits. It has various highs and various lows, which means if you take advantage of what this month represents from creation, God has given us the table of contents. We can progress 1,000,000 times faster than in another month. On the other hand, if we mess up on the fixing of these various characteristic traits in that month, then it's much easier and it's a bigger crash landing that we have. So, give a few examples. We look at the calendar of the year and we say, wow, you know why the month of Nisan is so important? Because of the fact that in the year 2448 Jewish time, the Jewish people exited from Egypt. And that's why the month of Nisan represents freedom from oppression. Wrong. When God created the world, He created in each month various powers and traits. And therefore, from the day of creation, the month of Nisan has within it characteristic traits of freedom and leaving oppression. Therefore, Passover landed in the month of Nisan because Nisan, is the attribute. And therefore, when the Jews connected to that wave of freedom, therefore they were released in that month. So we have Abraham and Lot celebrating Passover 400 years before Passover. Got that? Abraham and Lot, two separate incidents celebrating Passover. If you look at the end of the Haggadah of Passover, we see many Torah historical events that happened once again on the 15th day of Nisan, the day of Passover. And once again, we must attribute this to the beginning of creation. We have a month called Av, the month of Av. When God created the world, this was a very difficult and had the potential to be tragic. And therefore, if the Jewish people were careful, they would have been able to avoid this crash landing. But because we didn't, this month from creation was already a possibility for destruction. Destruction of the temple, destruction of the land of Israel, destruction of the Jewish people. Therefore, so many historical events occurred throughout the ages during the month of Av. Not due to the fact that it became a difficult month when the temples were destroyed. No, from the beginning of time, beginning of creation, it had within its chip, its code, difficulties. If you look at the weather in the month of Av, it's approximately August. It's extreme, the weather. And that tells us a little bit about the characteristic traits, which are also very extreme. Okay, so the world says time is of essence. We Jews come by and say time is essence. Time is essence. Okay, looking back at the last 2,000 years, dear friends, we see two of the greatest historical events of 2,000 years, that says a lot, were the War of Independence, the War of Liberation in the month of ER that we are in now, 1948, and the second major league event in the last 2,000 years was, of course, in 1967, the Six-Day War that, once again, occurred during the month of ER. And we know that there are no coincidences. So what does that teach us? When we look at the state of Israel, there are so many question marks. There are so many tremendous things about this land, of course. And there's so many tremendous things about this country. However, we know that there are, unfortunately, many terrible things. There are many, we won't say many, there are a few Jewish anti-Semites in the land of Israel. And there have been throughout the years various decrees against Torah, against Judaism, from the beginning until this very minute. So we're going to try to get This is our guide for the perplexed, how to look at the events that have taken place in the last 70, 80 years here in the land of Israel. Okay, so our beginning point to start is following. In the book Doresh Tzion, on page 80, in 1866, the Rabbi Yosef HaSofer, author of the book Kol Yehoshua, got up and spoke the following words. Listen to what he says. Because the days of counting the Omer are so lofty and holy, there is more of a necessity to take precautions against the forces of evil. We know that when something is very high and lofty and grandiose, you need a lot of more protection so you don't fall. Give an example, a very simple example. You almost never see in, let's say, the NFL, you almost never see back-to-back championships. Why is that? Because after a team has won a championship and they're on the top of the pedestal, every game the next season, all teams are all pumped up and they've been practicing and looking forward and they're playing their best against the champions. So it's very, very difficult because every single week you have teams that are playing their best because you are the champions of the world and we're going to try to take you down. That is a very, very difficult position to be in. So says Rabbi Sofer, the days of the counting of the Omer are days of strict judgment. We saw with those events 2 days ago. Very strict judgment. However, there are 2 days within the counting of the Omer, the 49 days between Passover and the holiday of Shavuot. There are 2 days that are the untouchables, that cannot be affected by the forces of evil in the world. What days are those? Those are there is a tradition from the Gra, Rabbi Eliyahu from Vilna, that he gave down to his students that there are 2 days that are the untouchables. Those are the 20th day of the Omer, which is the 5th day of Iyar, which is the day of the declaration of the independent state of Israel. Unbelievable. And the 2nd day is the 47th day of the Omer, which comes out to the 42nd day of the Omer, which comes out to the 27th day of Iyar. And we'll talk about the 6-day war and the liberation of Jerusalem at that time. So amazing. We have 2 of the greatest historical events in the last 2,000 years that happen on the 2 days that the Gra has said that these are special days for the redemption of the Jewish people. These are the untouchables. The forces of evil cannot affect them. So, second point, the first neighborhood, the students of the Gra that came to the land of Israel, they took this principle very seriously. And when they came up with a plan for settling the land of Israel, they tried as much as possible to plan it for either the 20th day of the Omer or the 42nd day of the Omer. So, believe it or not, the first neighborhood outside the walled cities of Jerusalem, the old city, occurred in 1869. A place called Nachalat Shiva today still exists right outside the walls of Jerusalem. That was established. The cornerstone of that neighborhood began on the 5th day of Iyar, once again the 20th day of the Omer. Next, in the year, clean out your ears for this one, in the year 1812, 7 families from Safed moved to Jerusalem. I kid you not. How many Jews lived in Jerusalem in 1812? That's 209 years ago. How many Jews lived already in Jerusalem? 29 Jews lived in Jerusalem. So think about that. This is big time. 7, not individuals, 7 families. Let's say all of them have a couple of kids. This was a big influx, I hope they had room there for everybody. Amazing. So 7 families move. And once again, on the 20th day of the Omer, which is the 5th day of Iyar, the students of the Gra begin building a study institution, a yeshiva. It was called Beit Midrash Eliyahu, in memory of their rabbi. And it began on the 5th day of Iyar, as was their principle, to succeed in settling the land of Israel. And they set up one building, dear friends. And you know what they said? This could be found in Doresh Tzion on page 90. They said, we felt clear as day. In our hearts we felt. It says in the Talmud that since the destruction of the temple, some 2,000 years ago, there has been, so to speak, a metal barrier between the Jewish people and God. For the first time, we felt, when we started erecting this building on the 5th day of Iyar, we felt that there was a breach in that metal barrier. For the first time, there was a breach. Dear friends, if there was a breach in the barrier because of one building, what do we say today? What's going on today in the holy city of Jerusalem? So let me tell you, let me fill you in on what's going on. So once again, 1812, there are 29 Jews in Jerusalem, and then 7 families come. 7 more families come, and that was in the year 1812. Moving up some 32 years, we have 1844. We have now in Jerusalem, amazing, 7,120 Jews in 1844. 1922, there were, get this, 1922, there were 33,971 Jews in 1922 in Jerusalem. 1948, Israel became independent. There were now 100,000 Jews in Jerusalem. 1967, 19 years later, 195,000 Jews. What an influx. 195,000. Today, 2021, there are approximately 703,000 Jews living in Jerusalem today, 2021. Folks, if you're still sitting down, then you don't understand what we're talking about. Do we get the picture here? Do we see God's hand? Is this Satan? God forbid. So we see that is what's happening. Amazing. When the Jewish people left Egypt, they left with 600,003. And think about it today, not in the land of Israel, but just in the city of Jerusalem. There are more than 600,000. There are close to 703,000 Jews. Amazing. Miraculous. Astonishing. Okay, next. The Holy Arizal, who lived in Safed 500 years ago, in one of his books called Tzadik Yesod Olam, which is a commentary on the scrolls of Ruth, on chapter 3, verse 13, it says there that Boaz tells Ruth, please lie down, and in the morning, should he decide to redeem you, you shall be redeemed. If he does not want to redeem you, and then it says, the living God, Chai, Havaya, Yud K Vav K, will redeem you. The Arizal says on this verse that, dear friends, he tells us that there is a tremendous secret within this verse. And it is a tremendous hint at the time which we will be redeemed. Within this one verse in the scrolls of Ruth. This is a secret, and there is a hint to when we will be redeemed. That's pretty big. And then he explains what's going on. There are two times, says the Arizal, when the Jewish people can be redeemed. Number one, if the Jewish people repent, wake up, and repent, then of course that is one time. And that Boaz was hinting. When Boaz told Ruth, lie down now. Lying down means you're going into exile, darkness. And if he so chooses, who's he? If God so chooses, why would God choose? If we repent, then he will redeem you. However, if he chooses not to redeem God, there's a second possibility. And that is if the Jewish people do not deserve to be redeemed. So why would we be redeemed? Arizal says, for the sake of the name of God, because God's name has been so desecrated, the world saying, where is your redemption, Jewish people? If you had a God, he would already be redeeming you. So for the sake of God's holy name, I will redeem you, even though the Jewish people are not worthy. And he swears that even if we are not worthy, eventually that time will come. And he uses the name, when he swears, he uses the name Chai Havaya, living God. Arizal tells us that the name Chai is connected to the spiritual sphere called Yesod. And God's name, Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is connected to the spiritual sphere called Tiferet, splendor. Dearest friends, hold on tight. If you look at these two spiritual spheres, Yesod and Tiferet, and you look at the 49-day calendar of the counting of the Omer between Passover and the holiday of Shavuot, you will see what day of the sphere of the counting turns out to be Yesod Shebetiferet. It is on the 20th day of the month of 20th day of the Omer, which is the 5th day of the month of Iyar. Do we understand? The Arizal tells us a tremendous secret, a tremendous hint for our redemption. And for centuries, nobody understood. What in the world are we talking about? Until 73 years ago. Now we understand. We see the beginning of the redemption process on the 5th day of Iyar, or the 20th day of the counting of the Omer. That is the words of the Arizal. In the book Minchat Eliyahu on page 52, it gives an amazing numerical value count. If you look at the words of this verse in Ruth, lie down till the morning, and you do the numerical value, of course in Hebrew, of those words, it comes out to 713. If you write out the letters of the year 5708, which is 1948, according to the Gentile calendar, if you write the letters Hey, Tav, Shin, Chet, right? Hey is 5, Tav is 405, and then you have Shin is 300, so we have 700 and 705, and 8 is 713. Amazingly, when God, there is a hint here that in the year 5708, 1948, on the 20th day of the Omer, or the 5th day of Iyar, God will begin the wheels of redemption are beginning to roll big time. So that's the Arizal. Next, we have the Shlah HaKadosh. In the end of tractate of Psachim, tells us an amazing issue, and I'll get our whiteboard here to explain it. Okay, we have, okay, good. Okay, we have one of God's names is Elokim. Aleph, Lamed, then Hey, then Yud, and then Mem Sofit. Okay? And there is a principle that is brought down in the Arizal many times, that this name of God, its numerical value is 86, and it stands for strict judgment. Strict judgment, something we would like to stay far away from. So, how do we do that? How do we mitigate strict judgment? So the Arizal tells us that we know that when God is, so to speak, forced to send down strict judgment in the world, what is the thought process, so to speak, of God before he brings down the strict judgment, the punishment? The idea is an idea of kindness in order to save us. Unfortunately, sometimes our children, we have to punish them, but our idea behind the punishment is not an idea of vengeance, of cruelty. Exactly opposite. Because we love our children, therefore what happened just now has to be, a person has to be punished. But the thought process before giving out the punishment is a process of chesed. So the Arizal tells us an amazing thing. If you take the letter before, we will see how to mitigate strict judgment. So the letter before Aleph is Aleph. There is no letter before A. Then we have the Lamed. The letter before Lamed in the alphabet is Kaf. Then we have Hey. And the letter before Hey is Daled. And then we have Yud. And the letter before that is Tet. And last but not least, we have Mem Sofit, but the letter before Mem Sofit is the same Mem. So these two, the first and last, we do not count right now. We just count these three letters. What you see here, the letter Kaf, the letter Dalet, and the letter Tet is a holy name of God. And it is a holy name of God that is numerical value of 33, which is the very interesting, the 33rd day of the Omer, which is Lag BaOmer celebration. And this name of God mitigates the punishment, the severity that was supposed to come down by our deeds, by our ways, what we're fixing in our lives. We're able to take this strict judgment and tone it down till it comes out a name of mercy on the Jewish people, and especially on the 33rd day of the Omer. Okay, now, with that said, the Shla comes by, and he says an amazing idea, that the whole idea behind counting the Omer is to reduce the level of severe judgment. We said these 49 days are days that are packed with strict judgment. And therefore, what we do is when we are counting the days and when we are trying to improve ourselves, our traits, our actions between us and God, between us and man, therefore, every single day, that severe judgment is going down a level. Now, this is very important to remember. When we talk about the days of the Omer, we don't say that today is the 35th day of the Omer. That would mean that day number 35 stands to itself. Just like today is Sunday, Sunday stands by itself. But that's not what we say when we count the Omer. We say today is 35 days of the Omer. You have today 35 packed in days. Imagine, I call it the snowball effect. The first day of counting of the Omer, we have a few pieces of snow. And then you start, you put it over the mountain, over the slope, and it starts becoming bigger and bigger and bigger as it's traveling down the mountain. This is exactly what's happening. On the first day, we have power of one day. On the second day of the counting, it's not day 2, it's 2 days. We have 2 days worth of power here. And as the days go by, there is more and more power. But listen to the words of the Shla. The Shla says that there are 3 major stations, ramps, off-ramps, during this 49-day process. They are special periods of time. And based on what we just saw in our charts, go back to it, we have the 3-lettered name of God. The first letter was Kaf, which is 20. So the Shla says the first pedestal of my mitigating strict judgment comes on the 20th day of the Omer, which once again is the 5th day of ER, which is the day of the War of Independence, the declaration of the State of Israel. That's amazing. And the second station to this pedestal comes, the next letter is 9. So nine days later, 9 days later, so you have on the 29th day of the Omer, the counting, you have another crescendo of a day which is special for erasing and eliminating strict judgment. And of course, last but not least, the last letter of God's name is that Dalet. 29 plus 4 is 33. That is the day of Lag BaOmer. Somebody asked me this morning, Yehudah, we know about this process of the Omer is trying to mitigate. So how come we saw such severe? So first of all, not always are we doing what we're supposed to do. This is a wake-up call for us. These days are days of strict judgment. We are supposed to be mitigating the severe judgment, but if we're not successful, so we're going to get hit. Another point that I concluded was, who knows what could have been? It could have been much, much more serious. Anybody that's been there understands what I'm talking about, because we have 500,000 people there. It could have been much, much, much more serious. This was kind of a merciful act, looking at it that way. So it's an amazing thing. Once again, we have so far the Gra who's telling us, let's just summarize, we have the Gra that's telling us the specialness about 2 days, the 20th day of the Omer and the 42nd day of the Omer. Both were days where the Jewish people received many measures of liberation, 1948 and 1967. And then we had the Arizal, who was telling us a tremendous secret and a tremendous hint. When the redemption, if we do not merit the redemption, when will it come? It will begin, as he told us, on the 20th day of the Omer, which is the 5th day of the ER. And last but not least, we had the Shla, the Holy Shla, telling us about this, the two names of God, one being strict judgment, Elohim, and mitigating it down to letter Kaf, letter Tet, and letter Dalet. And all of these being stations that are the pedestals of this mercy on the Jewish people. These are special emergency exits that God has given us that are very potent. These three exit zones. Okay. Folks, when we talk about 1948 and we talk about 1967, that was a long time ago, 73 years ago, and 67 was 54 years ago. This is a long time ago, and unfortunately we forget. So it's important to remember some things. When we look at this entity called the land of Israel, and we look at what is happening in this country, we must go back. Very important to go back. So let's look at these two major historical events in the last 2,000 years, 1948, 1967. Let's start closer to our generation, 1967. During the Six-Day War, which is an amazing concept in itself, it says in the Torah that God created the world in 6 days, and on the 7th God rested. That wasn't a one-time event. The Jewish people fought a battle in 1967 for 6 days, and on the 7th day God rested. So who was in the fight? In 1967, welcome aboard. We have Egypt, we have Syria, we have Jordan, we have Iraq, we have Lebanon, we have Saudi Arabia, we have Morocco, we have Algeria, we have Libya, we have Tunisia, and we have Sudan. Welcome aboard against the Jewish people, 1967. How many soldiers did the Jews have? How many soldiers did the enemy, the Arabs, have? The Jews had 214,000. The Arabs had 307,000. Got it? 307,000. 100,000, almost 100,000 more. The Jews had 196 fighter planes. The Arabs had 957 fighter planes. The Jews had 800 tanks, and the Arabs had 2,504 tanks. In the land of Israel, the Jewish people prepared massive graves, tens of thousands of graves throughout the world, the Arab world. We're not going to go through all the quotes, but we could have a class on the quotes. We are going to annihilate the Jewish people. We are going to throw them into the sea. We are putting an end to the Jewish state. There was tremendous fear amongst the Jews that this was curtains for the Jews. Understand what we're talking about. Everything was real. They weren't just threats. People were digging those graves in Israel, preparing mass graves, preparing cemeteries for what would come. People feared that this was going to be just like in 1948. They feared that this was Auschwitz II, the number 2. Listen to this. We said, according to the tradition of the Gra, 300 years ago, when it comes to progressing the redemption, when it comes to progressing the blossoming of the land of Israel, we have 2 dates. The 5th of Iyar and the 27th of Iyar. Listen to this. On the night of June 5th, that is the 27th day of Iyar. Okay? 27th day of Iyar, just like the Gra said. There was a secret meeting that took place in the basement of the Knesset, as they could not meet in a regular place, as the city was being barraged by missiles. The officials at this meeting, the Jewish officials at this meeting, discussed the historical, perhaps once in a lifetime opportunity to liberate the old city. The Knesset officials, the government officials of Israel were certain that a ceasefire would shortly be forced upon us. And they understood that if they went ahead with their plans of liberation of Jerusalem, there would be an uproar in the Muslim and the Christian world. And who knows what that will bring. Do we understand the danger that the Jewish people, we are in danger in the land of Israel, and we are in danger all over the world, from the Christian and Muslim world. Because in the old city, that is, so to speak, because they understand, they are like a magnet. They are drawn in. The Muslims and the Christians, look how many churches they have there. Look how many mosques they have there. Why is that? Because they understand. They understand that this is Jewish holy places. They understand that. So this is an amazing event here. What do you do with such a fear? What does one do? And dear friends, I remember years ago hearing from our dear Rabbi Kahana, why did he have these wicked people be the leaders of Israel and not righteous people? It's sad to say. Who knows what would have happened if there were religious people at the helm? Would they really have had faith in God to go ahead with it? So the rabbi tells us, question mark. He had to put these people in. And amazingly, sometimes you look at a person and the guy has a gigantic skull cap and his gigantic beard and a long coat and a hat and all the works. But a simple Jew has much more true faith and belief than the learned, unfortunately. Sometimes when push comes to shove, you could see somebody that doesn't look religious, or maybe perhaps even is not doing all the commandments. They pass some religious people in belief and faith. With all of these considerations of dangers from within and without, they decided to go forth. This happened on the 42nd night of the counting of the Omer, the time when the Gra tells us that this is the climax. This is the time to progress the wheels of redemption. And that is what happened. They decided to go forward. Back to 1948. The end of the British Mandate was set for Saturday, May 15th, 1948. That is the 6th day of Iyar. The Jews knew that if they declared a state, Arab armies would pour in and attack the Jews in the land of Israel. America, our dear friend, sent its ambassador George Marshall to the region to warn the Jews not to declare statehood. A Jewish cabinet of 13 members, 3 were not present. 3 could not arrive at the meeting. So we had 10 people to decide what to do. We're being pressured by the world. We're being pressured by our friend in America not to declare statehood. Put it off. Yeah, put it off. Put it off for another 2,000 years. And it was uncertain. The vote was so... The discussion went on for 13 hours. On Friday, the 5th of Iyar, the 20th day of the Omer, 13 hours of deliberation, dear friends. And it was so close. The sides were, the decks were even. Ben-Gurion came and he talked to the individuals who he felt were tottering. And he said, you gotta vote. You gotta vote for this declaration. In the end, it turned out to be 6 for the declaration and 4 against. Who knows if there were another 3 members, who knows which way the vote could have gone. And unfortunately, one of those 3 that couldn't make it was a member, a religious member from Agudat Israel, and another member from the Mizrahi, 2 religious parties. Don't know. Don't know. A tremendous, this is unbelievable. People don't understand, but the war kept on going. Yeah, you're right. But why do we celebrate? The big celebration is exactly on the correct date. When the Jewish people jumped into the sea, it was the 5th day of Iyar. And they said, we believe. That is the greatest miracle of all. What were the forces like in 1948? In 1948, once again, the Jews were tremendously outnumbered by our Arab enemies as the Arabs went to war. The head of the Haganah, who would later become, after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, he would later become chief of staff. His name was Yigal Yadin. He replied to a remark of a famous author, army personality, professor in Israel, one of these so-called intellects. And this person, this so-called intellect, named Yehoshaphat Harkivi, he mentioned that at the time, after the destruction of the Second Temple, some 2,000 years ago, Bar Kokhba and the Jewish people acted irresponsibly, and they were destroyed because of the fact that they weren't realists. They threw away their wisdom, and they went on a belief, they went on an emotion, and they were irresponsible. And Yigal Yadin, not a religious person, he comes and he says, listen, if this dude, Yehoshaphat Harkivi, if he would have been around in 1948, when the question was, should we go ahead and declare a state of 600,000 Jews, that's who existed at that time in the land of Israel, there were 600,000. And you have America and the UN and different countries pressuring us not to declare. What would he have done? He would have said it is irresponsible. And Yigal Yadin says, thank God we didn't listen to such people. And we declared a state. How times have changed. How times have changed. In 1948, these 10 leaders of Israel remembered the courage and the bravery and the sacrifice and love of the land of Israel of Bar Kokhba. And they remembered, and they believed, and they leaped into that water, to that sea, and God split it again. During this 13-hour deliberation, let's listen to some of the opinions against the declaration of the State of Israel in 1948. The head of the Haganah, Yigal Yadin, when he was asked, what are our chances? And once again, he said to go for it. But they asked him, what are our chances? He told them 50-50. It's amazing. You have 50% chance of being destroyed. I told you again, they were calling it perhaps the Holocaust, second Holocaust. Auschwitz II. Others had mentioned that to declare a state of Israel would be there would be a real possibility of the destruction of the Jewish people, the 600,000 people in the land of Israel. There was a real possibility of destruction. United Nations and America had decided no assistance for Israel if they go ahead and declare their state. Israel would remain isolated. These were all brought up in the deliberation not to do it. But in the end, with pressure from Ben Gurion, they gave the green light. Think about it, dear friends. Is Israel God's hand or Satan? In 1948, there were 600,000 Jews left in Israel. Move fast forward 73 years. Today there are 6.9 million Jews in the land of Israel. Ken Yirbu, may they continue to multiply. This is a tenfold increase. Israel makes up only 3% of what they call Western Asia. Turkey, Iraq, Iran. In 1948, dear friends, 700,000 Arabs hit the road, Jack, or hit the road, Mohammed. 700,000. Asking, do we see God's hand? 700,000 enemies of the Jewish people get up and leave. Are we insane? Do we not see God bringing us the redemption? 6.9 million Jews. "47% of Jews, world Jewry, live in the land of Israel." That is amazing. In a few years, there will be a majority of the Jewish nation will live in the land of Israel. Do we understand the ramifications for that? There are Jewish laws that will change. The laws next year is the sabbatical year. That will now become, when we pass the majority very shortly, that will become a Torah commandment. When we have a question mark when it comes to the laws of giving a tithe, the laws that are connected to the land of Israel, they will become biblical and Torah, and therefore we have to be strict, because the principle is, if it's a rabbinical, there is more room for leniency. But if it's from the Torah, then there is much less. There is no room for leniency here. We're talking about big changes. The majority of the Jewish people are now. This is Satan. Satan brought the majority of the people. We've gone nuts. Look at the religious population. Put a smile on your face. The religious population. In 1980, 4% of the total population were the God-fearing, what they call the Haredi population. 40 years later, fast forward till 2020, over 12%. Over 12% of the population today is from the very religious Jewish population. Over 12%. That means it multiplied itself 3 times in 40 years. The projection is, in 2040, in 19 years, the religious community will be over 20% of the population in all of Israel. With that said, it even gets better, because once again, this is what they call the Haredi. But there's also religious Jews. So as of 2021, 43% of the land of Israel is secular. 43% of land of Israel is secular. 11.3% are religious. 12% are very religious. 12.8% are traditional Jews. And 22.1% are traditional but not so religious. Do we understand when we put those numbers together? When we put the Haredi, when we put the religious, when we put the traditional, that respect, can have a love of God, love of the land of Israel, love of the commandments, though they, at present, never learned about them. But when we're talking about, we have already a majority. And time is on our side, and they know that. And the reason why they battle against Torah and against Judaism and the land of Israel is because of the fact that they know that time is on our side. Because it's only a matter of time, because there's a majority of religious people in this land. That is what's happening. A tremendous revolution in the land of Israel. Okay, then we will take a break, and God willing, next week we will meet up again.